Hello. Welcome to Stories This Boring. I'm Marika.
I'm Natalie.
This week we're going to be talking about the 2017 film Tragedy Girls.
Insert knife noise.
Shing. This film is about two sociopathic best friends who plan a series of murders during their senior year of high school as a tool to boost their social media following for their true crime vlog. The result is a film which mixes slasher tropes and high school movie tropes. It was inspired in part by Scream, Heathers, Jawbreaker, Mean Girls, and Ginger Snaps.
It's like all of my favorite movies.
Yeah. I think it is a very good balance of these two genres. And it has a very pop horror vibe.
Spoilers as usual.
Yes.
Go watch the film.
Mm-hmm. This film was written by Chris Lee Hill and Tyler McIntyre and directed by Tyler McIntyre. It is their second feature film together. Tyler McIntyre is director and them both as co-writers. Tyler McIntyre is ready for this? Canadian.
Fuck.
So Tyler McIntyre is originally from Old Alberta, Canada. He double majored in psychology and film studies at the University of Alberta, and then he went into the master's program in media production in 2008 at Ryerson University in Toronto. He then moved to Los Angeles and attended the American Film Institute, the elite school for film. And then he mostly works as an editor, while still occasionally working on his own projects. His first feature film is called Patchwork, another female-led horror comedy, which is currently available to stream on Netflix in Canada. So if you're in Canada, check it out.
For all of our Canadian listeners out there.
And we're doing it for you. And then his most recent film is Tragedy Girls, which came out in 2017. This film was a rewrite of a script written by Justin Olson, and which he wrote in 2009. And then they came on board with the script in 2015 and changed it vastly from what the original script was.
Do you know anything about the original script?
The original script was much straightforward slasher, I Know What You Did Last Summer vibes. But so even though they changed it a lot, they say to the Tyler McIntyre says, to Justin's credit, he did get the project set up originally, which is super important. He also came up with a really fun title that kept people excited. I didn't know if we would have been able to get this type of idea made as a spec if he hadn't gotten it set up first. So I thought that was cool. Even though they changed it so much, they definitely put in some legwork in terms of helping get the film financed. Another cool thing that I read in an interview with Tyler McIntyre is that his cinematographer, Powell Pogorzelski, the production designer, Mars Fieri, the costume designer, Dakota Keller, and the composer, Russ Howard, are all people that he's worked with a bunch. So it's another thing of a little team of buddies, which I thought was cool. And another thing about this film is that the casting directors were Lisa Beach and Sarah Katzman, who were quite famous casting directors. They casted Jawbreaker, and they also casted Wedding Crashers. And so I feel like they're acclaimed casting directors, and they obviously...
Good for comedies.
Yeah, they're really good for comedies. So, in an interview with the director, he was saying how, once the casting directors, sat down and talked with him, they came up with sort of a short list for who they wanted for the main actresses, and on that short list was Brianna Hildebrand and Alexandra Shipp. So, Alexandra Shipp plays Michaela, and Brianna Hildebrand plays Sadie, and they're pretty up-and-coming actors. Alexandra Shipp is probably most famous for being Storm in the new X-Men films. She also got her start on Nickelodeon. She was in the movie Love, Simon. She was in Straight Outta Compton, so she's in quite a range of things. And then Brianna Hildebrand, who plays Sadie, is probably most known for her roles in Deadpool 1 and 2. And she was also in maybe The First Girl I Loved, which I hate.
The first film I hated.
The first film I hated. But if you don't recognize them, you will recognize some other people in the film, such as Craig Robinson, who plays Big Al.
Big Al.
Big Al. Yeah, if you don't recognize his name, you know, you would recognize his face because he's been in just like an absurd amount of hit comedies. But one thing that was interesting is that he came on board with the film as a producer originally, and he was like slowly warmed up to being in it, but it was like not his original plan at all. So I thought that was cool because he just like really liked the script and wanted to come on board as a producer.
That's sick.
And then the other big name in the film is Josh Hutcherson, who is famous for playing Peeta in The Hunger Games. And
also in Zathura.
He's also famously the little boy in Zathura.
In the sci-fi cerebral thriller.
Yeah. So Josh Hutcherson actually has sort of a cameo in the film, and I heard that one of the producers was friends with him and convinced him to do it, like give him the script and the schedules lined up, so that was cool. I feel like it was a big, name win for the film to get people interested. And there's, funnily enough, also another actor from The Hunger Games in the film, which is Jack Quaid, who plays Jordan Welch, the boy toy in the film. And he is the son of Meg Ryan and Dennis Quaid.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
He seems so old, though. Like,
well, they're old now.
Like, really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what the kids are watching these days.
And then the other person who's in the film, there's another main actor in the film, is Kevin Durand, who plays Lowell, the serial killer that they accost at the beginning of the film. And he's also been in X-Men, funnily enough. And he's also in a show called The Strain.
Oh, that's that vampire one. Right?
Yeah. I read a review and it said, Tragedy Girls lives or dies on your love for Michaela and Sadie, which I feel like is very true.
Definitely.
Because if you love them, then you'll love the film, but if you don't, and I could see you not liking them as they are sociopaths who murder people, then you won't like the film. But I think like part of the reason I love them so much is just that their like chemistry is really good together. And I think that's like in part that they like were quite close in real life. Like I read that they lived together during shooting, and they'd also travel together in Comic-Cons because they're both sort of part of like the superhero world. And yeah, I think it's really good. I read in an interview with one of the producers of the film saying how they had a really great bond and like really good chemistry in real life, and that at times they might even team up against the director to make a point.
Hell yeah.
But also that he would like defer to their instincts a lot, being like young women, which I thought was really cool.
That's really sick.
And in regards to that, he is a man who likes to make horror films about women. And one thing he said in an interview was that it's rare to find a movie from the perspective of women slashers having fun on their own terms. So with that in mind, we came up with the opening sequence. It was designed to feed you a lot of iconic imagery, all-American kids, lovers lane, muscle cars, and then flip it on its head and put us in the point of view of Sadie and Michaela for the rest of the story to play out. There's another way to do this movie, for a less interesting perspective, where the girl with the glasses, played by Katie Sotelmeyer, is the protagonist. And Sylvia, Toby, and Jordan are people in her life. But we've seen that movie. Making the traditional victims of a slasher movie into the killers was where the conversation started and led to a ton of other ideas to build on. So I thought that was interesting because like the girl with the glasses you see in the film, I don't know if her character has a name, but she's like in a lot of scenes. Was something that I picked up on. She's like the best friend of the mean girl, and she's like they're talking to her about their blog in the classroom. She's at the dance later on, and I like this idea of that she's like there so much because it's sort of like this sort of vague idea that an ordinary slasher, she might be the one that we follow, sort of like the mousy, innocent girl who becomes the final girl, you know?
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of cool, actually.
That's sick.
So the film premiered at South by Southwest in 2017, and it was pretty well received, although there is, like, since its wider release on streaming platforms, there's definitely been, like, a bigger mix of reviews of people not liking it. And one thing I read was that in a review saying that Tragedy Girls is a lazy attempt at a horror satire redeemed only by how weird it is. And, which I did not agree with. In this review, like, the reviewer also wrote that he said that the only likable person in the film was Jordan Welch because he personally found him relatable, like having a crush on someone who's a sociopath. So I feel like this review was clearly written by an incel.
For real.
Is the takeaway.
Yeah,
and
fuck that,
I
dude.
think, like, that's a thing. Like, a lot of people hated this film. Like, a lot of incels didn't like it. You know? And, yeah. That's as simple as it is. And, yeah, I think it is hard, definitely, doing horror satire. I personally think there's something in this film for everybody, and there's been reviews to that effect, that it's a great introduction to horror if you're not a horror fan, and if you are a horror fan, there's, like, so much references in it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, because Taylor McIntyre is clearly, like, a huge connoisseur of horror and has a huge love for it, and I think that that's clearly present in the script.
Definitely.
And I actually read that interview with Chris Lee Hill, the other co-writer, and he said that he would bring the comedy and that Tyler McIntyre would bring the horror. So I thought that was cool, and I feel like they obviously work well together because I think it's a really good balance. But another thing that people sort of took away from the film, a lot of other people didn't necessarily like the stylization of the film, such as, like, all, like, the mixed media and, like, you know, like, the texts, and it is, like, very campy in that way, and so I could see just, like, people not liking that. But another interesting thing upon reading reviews is that so many people, like, even in interviews with the director, would ask him about, you know, what he thinks about social media, like, is it dangerous, and, like, is the film commenting on the dangers of social media? And his response is that I'm not against it. It's just something to be aware of. And I think that people, like, a lot of people took it as, like, some kind of comment on social media because they have this vlog and they're obsessed with, like, its success and getting fame for it in the film. But I think that, like, as the director sort of affirmed in interviews, that people kind of missed the point because he just, like, was attempting to make a film about teenagers, and we're not in the 90s, like, this is the 2020s, and to make a film about teenagers that excludes social media, like, would be very hard, you know, because that's so much part of teen culture.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also feel like the thing with their blog is that, you know, it's a completely normal creative outlet for this day and age. If this movie was from the 80s, maybe they would be horror writers, you know,
Yeah.
or have, like, maybe if it was in the 90s, they would have had a zine,
Mm-hmm.
like a true crime zine.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so many people want to just critique anything that has to do with social media because everyone sees, oh, millennials, social media, it's fucked up, it's dangerous.
Yeah. I was reading this review, and there was an interesting point. And they said there's a reason the 90s model for this stuff always worked better, and it's the same reason there really hasn't been a cult teen-driven movie since the 2004 Mean Girls, and that's because of social media. Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram have become all the rage, and now among the kids, they've very literally taken over life as we know it. And
Telling your kids to get off the Snapchat.
And I think it is, like, this thing of, like, it's still, like, quite hard for people to, like, represent social media and film in a good way, like, do it well. Mm-hmm. And I think that this film does do it well. Something that I think that, you know, like, is interesting about their obsession is that a lot of people look at millennials and say that they're, like, overwhelmingly narcissistic. but in the case of, like, our two characters, like, they are sociopaths who are, like, narcissistic, like, in a very different, because of very different reasons, and the fact that they're just millennials, they're sociopaths.
Yeah.
And narcissism often comes hand in hand with that.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I want to talk about is that, like, narcissism, I was, like, thinking about this, and narcissism is so gendered in teen films, I think.
Yeah.
And, like, even, like, looking at Mean Girls, like, there's, like, narcissistic girls in that, too. And, like, the main character becomes more narcissistic. She, like, transforms. And it's, like, before, like, social media, like, narcissism was still portrayed. And it was still gendered towards women. And
I mean, think about Heathers.
Yeah, Heathers. Like, I couldn't name a single teen movie that doesn't have a narcissistic girl in it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're often the villain. And it's, it's, like, interesting that people will, like, put it on social media. Because, like, it's something that's, like, always been depicted or, like, put onto young girls. So that's what I liked about this film, is that, like, even though they are narcissistic, but it's, like, not sort of just because they're girls or just because they're millennials. It's because they are sociopaths.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, I guess just another point to that is thinking about To Die For.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a film that was made in the 90s, and it's a woman that also exhibits a lot of the same sort of sociopathic traits,
Mm-hmm.
and she's obsessed with wanting to be on TV, wanting to be a sort of journalist personality.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's sort of the same thing. It doesn't really have anything to do with social media. Like, I'm sure that if the same thing happened, or if they made that film today, it would probably have to do more with social media, just because, or just the internet in general, because that's where we're getting our news.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, like, that's an interesting, I didn't even think about that, but they are very similar. The thing that I do like about this as well, though, is that, like, I feel like it is, like, it becomes ultimately just, like, a tale of friendship.
Yes.
And I think that, like, the thing that it doesn't end with them, like, I mean, it does end with their blog becoming successful, but, like, more importantly, like, the thing that's more important than that, which is made clear, is that, like, they're together again, and they're going to be friends, and they're going off together. They've made something together.
Yeah.
I also just think that, like, relationships in horror films, like, are just, like, a lot less powerful for me personally than, like, friendships in horror films. I feel like it's, like, so much more interesting to explore.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times there's so much horror surrounded with the idea of intimate sexual relationships.
Yeah.
That a lot of times it's sort of portrayed that one of them is going to hurt the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like relationships are usually not explored in any sort of positive way in most horror films, because it's sort of the idea of distrust or fear. And it is really cool to have something that it's just like this unbreakable bond.
Yeah. And, like, even if you compare it to, like, Scream, for example, like that one is, like, I feel like the main relationships that are focused on are, like, all romantic ones. And, like, even though, like, I feel like Rose McGowan and, like, the main character, Sydney, have, like, this, like, friendship, which I think is really cool. It's, like, really not a focus of the film at all. And, like, her death, like, isn't, like, a big plot point for the main character, even. It's so much more about, like, the boyfriends and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like their relationship is really cool in the way that her friend, like, really sticks up for her.
Yeah.
And really protects her when she can, but it does suck that she does die.
Yeah.
And I feel like it would have been such a different film if they were the last two standing at the end, you know what I mean?
It would have been so different, yeah. That's what I like about this film as well, like, it's just, like, turned on its head. There's, They are the final girls.
100%. Yeah, like literally they kill their entire class. So
Yeah.
they are literally the last girl standing.
Yeah. Oh, another thing that people said in reviews, like quite a couple of different reviews mentioned that they felt like the plot line with Lowell, who was like the murder that they capture at the opening of the film. So like the opening of the film, there's sort of like, like a car on a bridge. And I actually read an interesting fact that they originally wanted to do it on sort of like a lookout point, like the makeout scene, but then their like local kids in the town told them about the bridge, and so they did it there. And like the bridge was like built in 1996, which is the year Scream came out. So like just a fun piece of trivia.
It's also the year I came out.
It is also the year Natalie Carvalho and Scream both came out.
Of the womb.
I feel like there's probably a correlation.
Most likely.
Yeah. I'm sure that your parents were inspired to conceive you when they watched Scream. And then 9 months later.
I don't know if that math would work out.
I don't know what month it came out.
Me neither.
But it was like February?
What was I gonna say? Oh, but just going along with that, I mean, I love that this film is completely set up like a traditional slasher flick, you know?
Yeah.
And it also just so very quickly turns that on its head.
Yeah.
But continue.
Yeah, but a lot of people said that they felt like that storyline with Lowell, like they capture him, they want him to mentor them, but he like doesn't, so they basically just like, like lock him up. And a lot of people said that they felt like that was like an underdeveloped second plot line, which I like definitely disagree with, because I feel like that's like the whole point, is it's sort of like these threads of like these protagonists that could have been, but it's not their story. Like it's not Lowell's story. Like who gives a shit about Lowell? Like it's Sadie and Michaela's story,
Yeah.
And so I kind of like that it's not more developed, but it was something that people, didn't like. But I think it's just like people that are like too like nostalgic for like too like purists of the slasher genre. They like want to see that old stuff, but.
Yeah, and I mean, I do get it in the way that it's something that's sort of brought up and then just disappears, but it's, it makes sense within the context, he's a crazy misogynistic man.
Yeah.
And they're two girls.
Yeah.
And so why the fuck would he want to help them,
Yeah.
I mean, in that case, he probably should have, because he was tied up, but he's so misogynistic, he doesn't give a shit. So they're like, okay, then we'll just do it ourselves.
And also, I feel like, what else, like, do you want to see of him? Like, I feel like it, because, like, when you meet him, like, they've already solved the murders, They, like, know that he, like, who he likes. They don't, I mean, you don't really know why he does it, but, like, who cares? And, like, I don't really get what people want more of from that storyline. So I feel like it, like, wraps up quite well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think if he was in it more, it would kind of suck, because he sucks.
But one thing that is interesting about it is, like, when he escapes from their, like, where they're keeping him, is I feel like the thing, or it's like the same time when Michaela and Sadie's like friendship becomes the most tested, and Sadie sort of pulls away from Michaela. And why do you think that is?
I guess I feel like the whole part of their plan deals with this man being sort of locked away, hidden from society up until they need to blame it all on him. So it's sort of part of their plan to keep him in this space. And when their friendship is starting to crumble, it's like the walls coming down, and then he's able to escape. It's just sort of the idea of like lack of control. Things getting away from you. And I also love that, right in the beginning when the whole slasher setup is literally a setup within the film to capture Lowell, and when they capture him and they put him up in this weird warehouse space, they're immediately, like, emasculating him, which is super great.
Yeah, she's like, bad lol.
Yeah, I mean, they literally treat him like a dog. They give him dog food.
Yeah.
And it's just really great to see these two really young girls who nobody gives power and control to.
Yeah.
Having so much power.
Yeah, and I also love that, like, even when they're, like, tasering him, they're, like, don't even really know how to use the taser, but they're, like, still so easily able to best him.
Yeah.
Even their, like, lack of experience is, like, so clear. Yeah, and then pretty quickly, like, there's the boy that got killed by Lowell from their trap that Sadie was making out with, and then he's not really dead, so they have to kill him, and then they have to cut up his body and melt it in lye, which is pretty sick. I did read something about the film, like, because the film shot in sort of like small town Kentucky. It was like quite a small crew as well, but one thing that was funny that I read, that like the special effects guys like would just be like, like working away in like the Kentucky heat, like with like making like barrels of fake blood, which I thought was really cool.
That's sick.
Oh, Cody Williams and Brian Sides were the special effects artists, and they were known as the Blood Brothers. With large amounts of blood. That's like one thing I loved about this film, is that it made, like, I feel like all of the gore was so funny.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and I feel like, like there is that with Scream 2, but like it isn't like, it's like, it is more gory, like, but with this one it was like really funny, like just like the amounts of it, because it was from the perspective of the killers, not the victims, like it made it so good. And I feel like, I guess like in a weird way, it's also sort of like, a weird comment on like how desensitized we all are to gore, because we're all just like consuming it and it's funny.
Yeah, I mean every kill scene is such a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always weird mistakes. They never do anything perfectly the right time, but everything always sort of works out in their favor.
Yeah, and there's they also love that when they are creating these murders, they're sort of referencing other films. Like when they kill the Josh Hutcherson character, they're like, should we do a Death Proof style? And they like run his motorbike off the road. And then when they're killing the mean girl at school who wants to cancel the prom, she gets sort of like in this horrible accident in the wood shop, and they're like, it's like some Final Destination shit.
Mm-hmm. And when they're talking about Lowell, the town serial killer, they call him a Texas Chainsaw wannabe and a Michael Myers knockoff.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely something that's heavily comparable to Scream, and the idea that it's just the
meta-ness.
Yeah, the meta-ness and the you watch too many horror movies kind of thing, and taking inspiration from horror movies. But as much as I love Scream, I love the main characters so much better than Billy.
Yeah.
And his friend.
Yeah.
And especially just because of the differences in motives, sometimes a lack of motive, or a motive that's not very serious, is so much better.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you haven't seen Scream, please go watch it, because I'm gonna spoil it. But at the end, when she asks, because they're constantly referencing horror movies, and she's like, well, what's your motive then? And he's like, oh, well, like, it's scarier when you don't have one. But then he does end up having one.
Yeah.
And it's pretty dark.
Yeah.
And so I like that, all of this is kind of just, I mean, there might be something beyond the idea of blog fame. I'm sure there is, but we'll never know. And that's what makes it funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, like, I think especially we learn that they have, like, since they were young, like they could have been murdered at a very young age. So like before the prospect of internet fame was the thing, I think
Yeah.
it's like clear that it really isn't just like they're desperate for the fame. This is the only way in their minds.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and also I just like I love that how much they love to murder. And there's like a part in the blog. You see a clip of their vlog, and they're sort of recreating like deaths, and like they're covered in blood. It reminded me a lot of Ginger Snaps, I think,
Mm-hmm.
when they do like the death reenactment project.
Yeah, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about ginger snaps. I'm probably gonna come back to this, but so I read this thesis by Amy Jane Vosper that's called "Film, Fear, and the Female: An Empirical Study of the Female Horror Spectator," and it's actually written by someone who went to Carleton University in Ottawa. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But it was written in 2013, and it's a really good thesis, just about the lack of information, of critical study on female horror fans in general, because it is, yeah, it's kind of a problem, I would say. I feel like female horror fans are just kind of left out in feminist studies
Yeah.
and gender studies. And I'll talk more about that later, but I just wanted to reference the thing that they were saying with ginger snaps, because I feel like it relates to what you were saying. It's in a section called The New Woman's Horror, and she talks about how slasher films had a chance to redeem themselves with female horror fans sort of later on after the big surge of slasher flicks. It's sort of post Final Girl concept. She's sort of saying that the inclusion of a strong female heroine was only the beginning.
Yeah.
And after the meta self-reflexive period of the 1990s, which is obviously where Scream comes from, the horror genre began to transform again with a greater female presence. So then she talks about the film Ginger Snaps, which we have an episode on that, which you should definitely listen to it, and you should definitely watch the film if you haven't. But I guess just as a little, it's a Canadian-made werewolf film, which is about this pair of inseparable sisters who are attacked by a werewolf, which causes one of the sisters to slowly turn into such. And it has a lot to do with sort of menstruation symbolized in lycanthropy. So it centers on two social outcasts, and the film showcases intelligent young women struggling with their positions in society. The girls are smart but depressive and talk about killing themselves out of boredom and a genuine desire to be released from a conceptualized suburban hell. Combining their obsession with death and their collective intelligence, the sisters construct elaborate artistic projects depicting representations of death, decay, and suicide. The film can be read as an allegory for the female horror fan. Frustrated by her inability to assimilate to standard representations of horror fans, the female seeks out ways to express and rectify this conflict. Since she cannot fit into the genre as it exists, the genre must be adapted to fit the female. I feel like in a lot of ways, I sort of like the idea of them being sort of trapped in this suburban hell. Kentucky, the taint of America. And they're sort of being so smart and also being death obsessed. I think are both like traits that the main characters in both of these films have. Whereas I feel like in Ginger Snaps, they use photography as an outlet for the sort of pains of being stuck and being really smart and being really obsessed with death.
Yeah.
But for Tragedy Girls, there's sort of the whole idea of, especially with a lot of serial killers, that what they do is their art. And so I feel like that's their way of creating.
Yeah.
Is I mean, obviously they have the blog too, but I think it's also a way for them to create.
Yeah, and they're like, are always so spectacular. Like when they kill the girl in the wood shop, and they like put her head like
Oh,
spinning on that
yes.
thing, and like her limbs are all just like splayed apart. It's just like
Beautiful.
it is beautiful, and like the prosthetics that went into making it are beautiful too. Like I remember reading an interview with the actresses, and they were saying like they were filming the scene with Craig Robinson, and the special effects guys like brought out this like prosthetic version of his body, because like in the scene like Wade like smashes his skull in half, and it's pretty great. I just like that they crafted it. It's like so cool. It's like so much art in it.
It's amazing.
And it's like nice like to be able to just like experience gore so in such a desensitized way. Like I don't know if that sounds like a bizarre thing to think, but like like you don't have to like you don't flinch really, because you're rooting for them, and so it's just like fun to experience like the beauty of all these like effects. And
Yeah, and I mean, that's so much what this thesis is talking about, is just the idea that, slashers aren't just for men. And there was a while where it was mostly just, half-naked women running around from some dude that has some weapon that symbolizes a penis, like, obviously, Barbara Creed and Laura Mulvey and all of those people, there's a reason why they wrote those essays.
yeah.
But also, it's stupid to say that these things are only for men and can only be enjoyed by men, and women would never appreciate gore or anything like that. And I think that's bullshit. And I think both of us, as female horror fans, love a good gore fest.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's enjoyable in a way of just, confronting fears head on and making them.
And we were talking before about like our motives for killing people. Sometimes it's just like that this person is annoying them, like in the case of their classmate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also like, something they can publicize, and
Yeah.
their motives like also show like a lot about their relationship, because like sometimes I feel like the motives of like will come from like their possessiveness of each other. Like I think that a lot of the reason like Sadie pushes to kill Josh Hutcherson's character, like Sadie like decides she doesn't like people quite quickly, and like they tell you that with like the snap zoom on her face looking angry. But I feel like a lot of it she like says to Michaela like, he's distracting you.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, but why do we have to kill the cute ones? And so they kill him, and then I feel like it's the same when Sadie's sort of becoming distracted by Jordan, the boy she has a crush on, and Michaela's pushing to kill him because they're both like possessive of each other, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think both in ways of slasher and in the way of their relationship, I think goes so much along with wish fulfillment that I feel like so many women can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a single person that doesn't get really, really mad at a person for maybe something kind of stupid, but for in that moment they wish that they were dead.
Yeah.
And, it's just kind of funny to see those things on screen, because it's so, that's sort of where the comedic aspect comes in, because it's so over the top, because everyone knows in their right mind, like, I'm not going to actually kill this person.
Yeah.
But it's funny to see it played out
Mm-hmm.
as this wish fulfillment. And also I feel like with their relationship, it's sort of the idea, especially when you're an adolescent and you feel like you're losing your girlfriends to guys, that, you wish that they were dead.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just want to have your relationship and you don't want to feel like some dude is coming in and pulling them away from you.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's sort of just the fact that they're actually able to kill these men that are getting in the way of their friendship is so great.
Yeah. But yeah, I find personally watching it, Jordan Welch's character is so annoying. And I think it's just because, like, I so heavily am rooting for, like, them to just be together. And he just, like, fucking comes in and such a little shit. And I just think it infuriates me that he's just so, like, on Sadie. And he just is, like, he's very smart, so he picks up on, like, that they are related to these crimes, you know? But he thinks it's, like, all Michaela, and he, like, starts trying to convince Sadie that it's, like, all Michaela and stuff, and you know, like, you should get away from her, she's dangerous. And then she kind of does, you know, like, get away from Michaela, and it's, like, you know, he thinks, like, oh, I'm saving her, and they start dating, and it just, like, infuriates me, because, like, she's just completely, like, lying to herself about, I think, like, in a way, because she, like, obviously, like, ultimately decides that she, like, does want to be like Michaela and be with her, because that's when she's happiest.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to unpack with Jordan as a character, because I definitely feel the same way. And even in the beginning, there's definitely part of me that does feel empathetic towards him, just in the way that it seems like MK won't even let them be friends with each other.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like a little bit of empathy, but it's sort of in a way where I wish I didn't, because I just want them and their friendship, and I don't really want anybody else in it.
Yeah.
Which is also sort of my own possession. But definitely in the way that his character gets played out within the film is really interesting, I feel like, from a feminist perspective.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the whole idea of just him being so completely blinded by the fact that this girl that he likes has, you know, he totally separates the two. He's like, they are kind of sort of one singular entity within the film, and he splits them, he doubles them.
Yeah.
As one has all the sort of negative traits and the other one has the positive.
Yeah.
And I feel like that, in a way, is something that's so often, that's something that happens so often within, I mean, obviously in real life, but also within films where there's some sort of female friendship. Even within, something that it kind of reminded me of was we watched Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always last night, which is a really good film by our teacher, Eliza Hittman, our old teacher. I mean, go check it out. I don't really feel like explaining what it's about right now, but it's just a small piece of it. There's the one part when they don't have any money, so they invite that guy that they met on the bus to come hang out with them so that he could maybe give them some money.
Yeah.
And the whole time he's kind of trying to split them apart.
Yeah.
He's always like, oh, like, you should drink with me, maybe you come with me over here. But he never asks the both of them. He's always trying to take her away from her friend.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that's so typical. It's something that happens all the time. And this is obviously, like, a much bigger portrayal of that. And it's just, like, you know, trying to split female friendships apart.
Yeah.
Because of your own agenda.
Yeah, and, I feel like, you know, like, initially I do feel empathy for him, but just, like, I feel like his character, like, devolves so much for me. Like, at the end, you find out that they actually killed his mother, but he's, like, become so annoying at this point that you kind of, like, don't care. I don't know if that's just me.
Nah, I get it.
Yeah, and he's, like, he's talking to her at prom, and he's like, you know, like, you should go to college, like, and then we'll be, like, so close together, and then we can, like, get married and have babies. And he's like, wow, and she's just, like, so clearly not interested. Like, it's so clear that she's not interested. But he just, like, and then he just, like, follows her, like, walks away. He's, like, talking to his friends, and he, like, goes after her. And then he, like, overhears that she participated in murdering his mother when they were children. And he's, like, Sadie, like, let's get out of here. Like, I forgive you. I know it wasn't you. This is all her. And it's just, like, he's so, like, just deluded, you know?
Oh, and one big thing that I got from that was when they're at prom and, you know, he follows her into the auditorium and he overhears the conversation and he's talking to Sadie and he says, "I know the real you. Come on, you're nothing like her." And I feel like that was a huge thing for me in judging his character because clearly he doesn't. You know, it's the same thing that you see so many times and experience so many times is, you know, men creating this fantasy of this woman and then when she's not what he wants her to be, he either abandons her or keeps trying to fit her into that box because there's no way that you could love the real woman. It has to be the fantasy.
Yeah. And it's just like the idea that because like so many people are like, oh, like I feel like a lot of, or like in my experience, there's like a lot of men, they'll like talk to you and be like, man, I can just like talk to you like nobody else like I've ever talked to. Like, you're so easy to talk to. I can like be myself around you. And they think like because like they're experiencing that, like whether it's true or just like they're saying it, that it's mutual. But like it rarely is.
Yeah.
You know, and so like people think that like because I feel myself around you, you must be your true self around me. But like a lot of time, like you're not able to be that when you're around people.
And there's like so many times when I've just been really good at listening to someone, you know, just hear them talk and then just kind of say some nice things back and then they think that I'm just so different and so amazing for that. And I'm like, but also you don't know anything about me. You've just watched me listen to you, you know?
Yeah. I feel like it's also like this perpetrated idea of like narcissism in women, you know, that just like by not talking about yourself, that you're somehow like so different from other women.
Totally.
Yeah. Which is insulting. Because like I find like in my experience like men are just as narcissistic as women. Like experience a lot of people that have no problem talking about themselves for 2 hours and like not asking me a single question about myself.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
Such a good time.
But yeah, I feel like, you know, like, he really annoys me. And I feel like I even get annoyed at Sadie for like, you know, giving him time and like ditching Michaela. But, you know,
but
I forget
they're in
her.
high school. You know, we've all done dumb shit like that.
Yeah. And, you know, I wonder if like a part of it is that she does feel guilty. Like, I feel like I sort of like think like a little bit like maybe she does feel guilty for killing his mom when she starts to like get feelings for him. But then like ultimately I don't think that's true because she kills him. So.
Maybe just for a hot second.
Maybe for like a hot second, but not really.
Not really.
Also, one thing I thought about, like, there's you see a picture of Jordan's mother. Like at one point, he's like looking at a picture of his mother and him, and I feel like his mother looks a lot like Sadie.
I didn't notice that. I have no idea what his mom looks like, but I would 100% believe that.
Yeah. And
that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I feel like he definitely has some, you know, she did die, like, quite in an accident. So I feel like there's definitely an element of wanting to save Sadie that's so appealing and why he, like, propels his narrative fantasy even more because it's sort of, like, definitely a thing, I think, sort of dealing with the loss of his mother and why he's so drawn to her.
Yeah.
And a pussy. I feel like even if it was reversed and Michaela was the one who sort of drifted and got a relationship, like it would be the same outcome because they definitely show that they're both possessive of each other.
I agree. I feel like there is one thing I was thinking about was they do come from like pretty different like socioeconomic backgrounds.
Yes.
But I think the fact that Sadie gets recognition and praise over Michaela, it kind of feels like it's motivated by race, I guess. Well, it's like the white girl getting recognition and appraisal
Yeah.
over the woman of color.
Yeah. Because I feel like they did that intentionally, you mean?
Yeah.
Because, like, in the story, like, Sadie gets recognition because she's like, in Jordan's room, stops the killer.
I mean, yeah, it obviously has
Yeah.
There's motivations that make sense within the story,
Mhm.
but I just, feel like as a woman of color watching it, I feel like I've been in that position.
One thing that's cool about this film is that the actress who plays Michaela is played by Alexandra Shipp, is half black and half white, and so she like talked a lot about like her experience like being biracial, how like she sort of like feels like a little bit in between, but she like also never gets treated as white, obviously. Mm-hmm. And the character who plays Sadie is queer, and so like they are both sort of marginalized women, and I think that it's really cool that these two women are the leads of this film.
Definitely.
Especially like people of color in slasher film history.
Very rare.
Very rare. Yeah. Like name another film where there is a final girl that's a woman of color. Is there one?
Not that I know of, unfortunately. Yeah. I mean, it's super rare to even have just people of color as main characters in horror films.
Yeah, not like the best friend.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's why I think Jordan Peele is getting so much recognition by making horror movies with a bunch of black characters in them. It's kind of stupid in the way that this should have been normal years ago, you know?
But it's not.
Like, everybody has fears, you know? Everyone can fit into a horror film. Mm-hmm. And it's really ridiculous that it's taken this long to have, horror films starring queer people, queer characters, or characters of color, or women. But it's cool that it's happening. Mm-hmm. For sure.
One thing about the film that I also love is that they have a Titanic-themed prom. That, like, Sadie and Michaela have, like, planned. They're, like, heads of the prom committee, so, like, they have chosen this. Like, I love that. Of course they would have chosen the most macabre theme that they could think of and get away with.
Because I feel like most people wouldn't think much of it because there's so many people
actually
that love...
do have Titanic-themed prom.
Yeah, and also it's a really famous movie that's a love story, so I feel like so many people could just write it off when really that their motivations behind it is because it's an insane tragedy.
Yeah, where hundreds of people died, and then they, like, set fire to the prom. Which I wonder if, like, maybe that was, like, their plan, or I don't know if that was their plan, like, a long-term plan that they had or not. I wonder.
I feel like it would make more sense if they flooded it, but I like that setting it on fire reminded me a lot of Carrie.
Yeah. I read that the silver stars are also, like, similar to the prom in Carrie, and a reference to that.
Yeah, and I feel like as well with the whole idea when I was talking about ginger snaps and how the film can be read as an allegory for the female horror fan. Yeah. And I feel like to have so many of these references in the film and to have these really, really strong female characters that women everywhere are going to relate to, it feels like an ode to you as the female horror fan, you know? Which is really nice.
Yeah. And I feel like to see, like, women making these homages to other film things is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Something I learned in my queer performance class was the idea of the feminist reshoot. Mm-hmm. Which I thought it's kind of a thing that's been used with, the only one I can think of right now, I probably should have just had a list, but is like Cindy Sherman, the photographer. Yeah. But it's something that, a lot of feminist artists have taken up. And Elizabeth Freeman, who wrote Deep Les, Temporal Drag, and The Specters of Feminism, said that many feminist artists have imitated high cultural masterworks or the codes of popular genres, forcing viewers to speculate on what female reauthorship or the insertion of an unidealized female body into these frameworks might reveal about their ostensibly universal representational stakes. And I think that this sort of idea of the feminist reshoot actually fits in really well with this film, because it has all of these conventions of a slasher flick. You know, you're kind of a lot of times with the killers, the monsters, and there's elaborate kill scenes, and you get excited to sort of see the gore and watch people drop, but it's inserting female bodies into that framework, which are rarely shown. I guess I also wanted to say, sort of pertaining to the ending, that they do get away with everything and they become really successful. I was reading this book that was about Gregg, the queer filmmaker, and the author of that was explaining that a lot of new queer cinema, which is sort of the movement that Gregg was part of, has to do with the queer characters defying death in one way or another, especially because it sort of came out of the AIDS epidemic. And, you know, clearly it's part of a very specific time when a lot of queer men were dying. But I feel like the idea of men, you know, both queer and straight, defying death has been sort of in cinema for forever. And so I really liked this idea of these two women. You know, it's not the final girl, it's two women who have this strong bond from the beginning, defying death, defying persecution. They get away with everything in the end, and they become successful.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about, like, in regards to, like, Ginger Snaps again, is that there's, like, a part in Ginger Snaps when they're, like, burying the body of the neighbor or whatever, and she's like, oh, like, people never think girls can do this shit. And I feel like it reminds me of this film because it's so, like, proven once again, because they're never suspected, really. Like, there's a point when the police ask them where their whereabouts was, but, like, really he's just, like, annoyed. He's, like, they're being called in because they've been interfering with the investigation. Like, nobody questions, like, how they get these videos of the crime scenes and stuff, but, like, nobody suspects them because they're, like, two cute cheerleaders, and they're just, like, silly girls.
Yeah, that's definitely something I really love about this, and I feel like that's sort of something that's sort of, like, referenced in the thesis, is that in these sort of feminist works or critical essays about horror, you know, female spectators are, like, totally left out, you know, because it's all about the male gaze. And when they do talk about it, it's kind of in, like, a pretty sexist way. It's sort of the idea that women will cower at the sight of gore, and that the only real female viewers of horror are masochists because they just love to watch themselves have some sort of played out pain scenes or death scenes, or that the only female viewers are just have boyfriends or spouses that love horror, and it's sort of like this mating ritual to have the big strong man that can handle the on-screen violence and the woman that cowers in his arms. Like, it's literally stuff that people have written in these critical essays. I'm not making this shit up. And it's really ridiculous. And so I love the idea that they sort of put on this mask even when they go to cheerleader practice and they're like, remind me why I did this again, I feel like so much a part of their being is to sort of wear this disguise that they're like the cute, popular girls. And so that's what helps them get away with so much. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
They would be the girls that would cower at violence.
And like also like the idea of like them like, you know, getting like the popularity and the status and the fame like it's something they want because like they have limited ways to be powerful, I think, like, you
Yeah.
know, and because like they have the intellectual ability to like manipulate a whole town of people into like going against like the mayor or whatever,
Fuck yeah.
but you know, like they have to play the part and they have to be like the popular pretty girls too if they want to like have any kind of power as women. Yeah, like when they go to the town hall meeting and they send that text of one of the bodies to everyone in the town, then they get up and they cite, or you know, everyone starts shouting like, "Remember Al?" And they like, start a riot.
Yeah.
For the man they've killed, like getting everyone to like rally about this person that they have killed. So
Yes.
so good.
So good.
Just because they want chaos and they want their blog to succeed.
Oh, another reference, kind of random, but another reference I noticed in the film was when they're having the vigil for Al and they're walking through the streets and they see Mayor Campbell impaled on the flagpole or whatever kind of pole it is.
Yeah.
It's 100% a reference from Cannibal Holocaust. And that scene was so famous because they thought that there was no way they could have shot that without the woman being dead. And so when they took the people to court for Cannibal Holocaust because they thought the people in the movie they actually killed, the woman actually showed them how they performed the
murder?
how they did like the special effect.
Yeah.
Like she sat on the pole and then they put on the stake and then they put the other piece of the stake in her mouth and it's like
That's so badass.
Yeah.
Imagine doing that in a courtroom.
yeah, what a bad bitch.
I just like love when special effects people just like shut down so much bullshit.
Yeah.
And I like suck my dick. This is my art. It's not real. Like I was watching a video about Poltergeist, and it was like about how like the curse of Poltergeist is that people think that, you know, a lot of people think that it started because they used real skeletons in like scenes in the movie, like real human skeletons in scenes in the movie, and then like they interviewed the special effects artist who's just like, suck my dick. There's no curse. Like, I made those. And he was like, they also use human skeletons in so many films. You would be shocked.
Every film's cursed.
Every single film is cursed.
I wanted to say like one more thing that I thought was really great about the film is so we've talked a lot about how it's a slasher flick, but you know, kind of turned on its head, reinvented. But I feel like as much as it's a slasher flick, you've also mentioned that it's a lot like a high school comedy.
Yeah.
And that was something I found really interesting, is a lot of the setup is actually really similar. It's equally a slasher as it is a high school comedy. And there's this one part when they're talking about their plans and they're at that smoothie shop that they go to, and they talk about how, I think Sadie is like, what, do you really want to go off to college before your first killing spree? And it's really funny because that's sort of a convention that's in so many high school movies, is the idea that you have to do something before you go to college.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's things like party for the first time or lose your virginity, and it's really fucking funny that in this movie it's going on a killing spree.
Yeah.
And I really like that.
Yeah. I also like, one thing I think about a lot of teen films is like there's this element of like conformity. And, you know, like, that's why, like, the makeover is such, like, a big trope of teen films. It's like, conformity. But I feel like this, like, in a weird way subverts it because, like...
Like, they already know how to fit in.
Yeah. But it's, like... And also just, like, being them true selves means being murderers.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, like, funny. Like, very ironic. What was your favorite murder/gore scene from the film?
I guess I have two. The first one, I would say, is definitely the scene in the wood shop. I mean, number one, just the fact that they don't even murder her. It's like a total accident.
Yeah.
And it is some Final Destination shit. She gets her ankle caught in this chain that brings large pieces of wood over the spiral woodcutter, and just gets her head sawn through. And then after that, they cut her up into pieces. And I mean, we've talked about this. They have her head spinning around and all of her limbs everywhere. And that's fucking creative as hell. And then also, I guess, another murder scene that I think is beautiful is when they lock the gym and set it on fire. And there's this one shot of Sadie and Michaela holding hands, and there's just light from the fire emanating through the two gym door windows, and just black hands, silhouetted hands, trying to get out, and they're just watching it.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Reminded me of like the end of Fight Club.
Yeah. Yeah, when they're holding hands and all the buildings collapse. Yeah. Do you think the differences in their economic status influence the way the characters are read or viewed?
I think like it could, like in a way, because there is like the sense of like Michaela, I think definitely sometimes, acts like can be like ruder or something, like for example to Jordan. And I think there is like a sense that she's just like, because she's more privileged perhaps, that she isn't the one to sort of want to like lay low, I guess. Like maybe that's something that, like the idea of them getting caught like is something that doesn't occur to her because of her privilege, whereas like maybe it does to Sadie, just because like perhaps because of that socioeconomic difference, like like it definitely like like even though like obviously Michaela is marginalized in a way, like you could tell that her parents just like shelter her so much, even though she's like a murderer. Like even the way like they present the information to her about there's like a new murder, like her mom comes in, it's like, honey, I'm so like, I don't know how to tell you this, but like there's been another murder, and Michaela's like and then Sadie's like just like in her room, and her dad's like, honey, another murder, and she's like, okay. So I don't know, like maybe there's like that you could read on into it, but also like because like they're separated by race and by socioeconomic status. Yeah. So I feel like that definitely like does create stuff, but I think like ultimately there's like the sense of that they are both like feel so invincible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it like totally, it's not like really anything that like drives the film, know. They are kind of from two different worlds, but it doesn't matter, which I think is an important thing.
Yeah. One thing actually I read in an interview with the actress who plays Michaela is that she was saying that like she was just talking about like the idea of like playing characters where it's not like a black character, it's just like a character who can be black, And so I feel like that's what I like about this film, is that it's like representation without it being like explicitly about race. Yeah. And or like, like socioeconomic status. So it's like not really about either of those things, that she's like, obviously from a poor family, Sadie, or that Michaela is black. Like it's just that's their backstories.
Yeah.
And yeah, like maybe like in the like what you were saying before about the idea of when Sadie gets the recognition and Michaela doesn't, I feel like that could be something that like the filmmakers sort of put in there. My next question is, what do you think that they do next after the film ends?
They tour America with their new book, and their blog popularity. And I also feel like they would probably fit in really well with famous people, so they'd probably stay famous for a while.
Yeah.
Because a lot of famous people are low-key sociopaths or narcissists. If you were to make a female-led slasher, what movies would you take inspiration from? Or what movies would you want to put little odes to?
Yeah. I mean, probably, like, honestly, a lot of the same films that the director of this film took inspiration from. Like, you know, Heathers, Ginger Snaps, Mean Girls.
I mean, like other horror movies that you would want to be like, where people could, like, point out, be like, oh, like, you know,
okay,
that's totally, like, Carrie, that's totally, like, Cannibal Holocaust, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I don't know, I mean, like, all the good ones, like Evil Dead, Nightmare on Elm Street. My last question, well, I had a question about, like, something we already talked about, so my last question is, what films would you recommend next for people who enjoyed this one?
I feel like a lot of the films I would recommend are probably films that I've already talked about. So I'm just gonna say I would recommend Jennifer's Body and Thoroughbreds. So Jennifer's Body is about a high school cheerleader, super hot, super popular, and gets unintentionally sacrificed and becomes a succubus-like creature that specializes in killing men. And it's one of those works that has sort of become appraised in feminist theory, especially with horror films. And I think it's a really great feminist film, and it's badass. And it's cool to see a girl using her sort of sexuality to get back at people, you know, for their bullshit, especially men. And then Thoroughbreds is about two upper-class teenage girls that live in suburban Connecticut, and they rekindle their friendship after years of growing apart, and together they hatch a plan to solve both of their problems no matter what the cost. It's kind of like a black comedy in a way, where both characters can be looked at in the same way as Sadie and Michaela, where they have sort of psychopathic tendencies. They're just, like, very detached. And it kind of has to do with them hatching these plans that are kind of this over-the-top wish fulfillment. You know, the idea of getting rid of people in your life that are inconveniencing you or doing any sort of disservice. What other subgenre of horror would you like to see a sort of gender swap?
Well, I feel like more like gothic horror films, like from like feminist perspectives, for sure, and like also just like body horror, like exploitation films and stuff.
Yeah, because I feel like those are definitely, I mean, those are the things that are sort of historically written critically about as being just for men and made by men, and I think it's stupid to believe that they're only for men to enjoy. I would enjoy a good exploitation horror film if it's super feminist.
Yeah, me too. I sure would. Thank you for listening.
Thanks. 1 subscriber.
We do it all for you.